Welcome to On the Bobble Podcast, episode 91. I'm your host, Sabasa J. Wade, and with me is my co-host, Yuki Lee Bender. Today we're going to be talking about a CC metagame predictions for Worlds in Osaka. I guess if you guys are listening to this weekly, you're going to notice that this is episode 91 before episode 90. We already recorded episode 90, but we decided that we should probably post this video before Worlds actually happen. So we're going to change up the order a little bit and post this one before our other episode. But I guess before we do that, then how was your week, Yuki?
So my week's been good. Mostly just been getting ready for Japan. That means a lot of CC testing and trying to figure out what deck I'm on. I've kind of been between like maybe 4-ish decks. We'll talk about that as we get into the episode a little bit. I think it's a very interesting meta, and there's a lot of questions that I have about it. Sort of trying to narrow that down. I'm starting to feel like I might just pick one or two of them and focus on that, but I'm not really sure what the best choice is for this event, which is honestly kind of exciting. I think it's like a little bit of a unique metagame, but yeah, I've just been doing a lot of testing and just some of the planning side as well, because I was like, after Osaka, I'm spending a week there and I don't have a hotel for that week, for example. So I've taken care of that and, exchange currency and just done some of the admin stuff that I need to do so I can just focus on having a good time at the trip. But yeah, honestly, I'm pretty excited. Feels like things are more or less ready. I just need to pack. So yeah, feeling pretty good about Worlds.
When do you leave for Worlds?
I leave on Sunday. So we're recording kind of, I guess, like Friday afternoon. I leave Sunday morning. So I need to get some cards together, need to pack. And I think that's about all that I have left. And honestly, I think a lot of my cards are together. I think I have the decks mostly built. Maybe just bring some. Typically, what I'll do is I'll bring a couple decks to test with or that I'm deciding between. And then I'll bring like, extra cards that I maybe aren't in the current 80, but like seem like they could be relevant kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Trying to put together cards in Japan might be a little bit tough right now too, right? Mostly if they're not from like a couple of the newer sets.
Yeah. And with everyone there for Worlds, you just like never know what card availability will be like. And I'd rather be able to focus on testing and enjoying Japan than like stressing out over scrambling for cards. So I usually always do this. Especially like even if there's like one deck I'm playing, I'll bring like 100 cards for that deck or something, and then I'll have like 20 cards, and most of them I probably don't really end up using, but it's just like just in case I decide to sideboard these kind of a thing.
Other than that, we got an article from FebTCG on the Back Alley Break Line, which is it's kind of like a rules update post that we get once in a while. And this one's kind of interesting, and it's on note-taking, game layout, and outside assistance. And I just wanted to talk about this very briefly because it was kind of interesting. And I don't think the rules actually changed on anything here, other than the fact that they kind of clarified some things. And the most important one that's noted here is that note-taking is not allowed in this game. And you can't also have anything that like reminds you of a tunic trigger or things like that. But what kind of did change or they reclarified was like the layout in a graveyard. And I kind of noticed that I guess technically we weren't allowed to like separate out cards or like reorder the cards in your graveyard to make things a little bit more clear before this article got posted. Now that this is posted, it kind of clarify that like we can separate like the earth cards out of our graveyard, or like we can put the Count Your Blessings in a different pile in your graveyard. And honestly, we've kind of been doing it and playing it like that even before this article came out. So like I guess they kind of clarified it and made it okay for you to do that now.
Yeah, I think it's probably just good to sort this out before Worlds. You don't want a situation where it's like a little bit unclear about what is or isn't allowed. And honestly, I think it's good. Basically, what they've said is if there's like a good reason for you to be sorting, like a functional reason for like clarity of game state or something like that, then it is fine. So if you are sorting your earth cards so that it's easy to tell how many earth cards are in your graveyard and to find them to decompose, that's okay. If it's easy to count your blessings, maybe they're in a separate pile or they're all on top or they're all on the bottom, something like that. That is also okay, rather than having to go through and count all the time. But if you are sorting by pitch or name to figure out what's left in the deck, not okay. So same as before, nothing too different, but I do like that they're making some exceptions for places where it just kind of makes the game like nicer to play, right? Is sort of how I think about it.
Yeah, imagine you can't like put your count your blessings together in your graveyard, and then every single time they play count your blessing, you have to go, okay, let me see your graveyard. One, two, three, four. Yeah, that would be awful.
Yeah, both players have to count it to verify. It's just like kind of a waste of time, right? And same thing with like the Earth Heroes, and those are both decks that can play longer games too. So I'm a big fan of this. Couple other small changes. They took away the the grid or like 2x2 equipment layout that some people like to do. They say that your equipment has to go in the proper zones and has to go to the graveyard afterwards. The equipment having to go to the graveyard was like, I think, already a thing that they were pretty strict on, but it sounds like they're going to be enforcing it even more. And then but the alternate layouts they said are not allowed unless you're just mirroring. So if you are simply switching the left side with the right side, that's okay. But otherwise, you need to be playing with the official layout, which I think overall is pretty good. Especially when you start having like, is it cloaked equipment? Sometimes it's a little bit awkward where like their equipment's like not in the right spot, and you're like, which slot is that?
Yeah, mostly once the game starts and like continues on, it might be okay at the very beginning when everyone has all their equipment. But like, imagine halfway through the game they were using the grid layout and they have one face down card in that grid, and you're just like, uh, handpiece, headpiece, leg piece, chest piece. Which one was it again?
Yeah, and technically you can ask and clarify it, but it's also just one of those things where I don't think there's like much reason for the grid layout. So yeah, not a huge change, but a minor one that they made.
Okay, yeah, I think that's about it. And I guess the one last thing would be like, technically you're allowed to like write down if Warmonger Diplomacy said war or peace per player. I don't think that was clarified in the rules before. Maybe it was, but it wasn't actually clear enough that all the players knew, because at least I didn't know that you could do this.
Yeah, I was aware of this. They said that like if it's like to track like a mode being chosen or X being like the cost of X, although people often just do that one with dice. But they said stuff like that you can write down, but not things like turn order or things not essential to the current game state. So yeah, no major changes, and I do kind of like Flesh and Blood's stance on note taking. It does tax the memory, but honestly, I think if Flesh and Blood announced note taking and everyone just has to like write the bottom of both players' decks like constantly, it's like it's just like not very good gameplay.
Well, we're just gonna go to time every round if it's like a new mirror.
Yeah. I think you would go to time more, and I also just think it's like kind of awful, right? Like it's just like you're doing like bookkeeping or something. Like you're not like I don't know. It's just I think it would take away from the enjoyment of the game quite a lot if you were doing that kind of note keeping. So I do like the memory elements of pitch stacking and all of that.
Yeah, I do too. I enjoy it a lot, which is why I like playing those kinds of decks.
Mm-hmm.
And let's move on to our main topic. It's going to be the CC meta game breakdown for Worlds, and I guess our predicted one. Where do you want to start? Do you want to talk about the last week of ProQuest London first?
Yeah, so we're recording on Friday, the 25th of October. There is still one more week of PQs about to happen this coming weekend, but of course, we don't have that data yet. So it'll be interesting to see how that data looks. But we can talk about week three's results and kind of make some predictions from there. And I think my guess is things are going to shift a little bit, but I think this is also a pretty good look of what I expect we'll see in the coming weeks, and also in Worlds with just maybe some decks trending up or down a little bit, but I think overall it's like fairly representative.
And I guess we'll just list off like the top decks here. So we're only going to talk about the heroes that have 10 wins or more, at least from this list. Starting from the top, it's Aurora, who got 20 wins, Enigma, who has 17, Florian, who has 14, Viserai and Nu both getting 11, and Dash and Azalea both getting 10 wins. I guess we start from the top here. Aurora, strongest deck in the format is what it looks like. How do you like this deck so far?
Yeah, I think Aurora is. We've seen her being like number one or two, kind of neck and neck with Enigma the whole PQ season. I think that she's powerful. I think that she has like a pretty intuitive game plan and she has a lot of flexibility to kind of go between an aggro deck and a little bit of a combo deck to deal with some of the more control-y blockout type strategies. So I think that Aurora has like a really appealing combination of things that she can do. She's pretty resilient to disruption. She has surprisingly good defense despite having a bunch of 2 blocks. Cards like Sigil of Suffering, and that's the D react that blocks 3, pings for an arcane, and gains a defense if it's delta damage. That card's really, really good in Aurora, especially with Channel Lightning Valley. And then we've also seen Electromagnetic Somersault, of course. And even if you're not getting the 6 block value, because like you have some 2 blocks in your deck, blocking 5 for that and also having it just be like an attack when you need it to be is very, very good. So Aurora's like not good at blocking, but pretty good at blocking a little bit when she needs to between her equipment and some of her defensive cards is like how I would put it. Like sometimes you just like throw a weakest link and she's just like, oh, perfect. I can just like block this. No problem. Like I'm happy to block this. And you're just like, it's not great.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising how many 3 blocks are in Aurora actually. Like half of her lightning cards somehow block for 3. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, it's like very bizarre because like you also do draw these hands where you have like 2 instants and 2/2 blocks, and that's why I say like she can block well sometimes. So she can't like always choose when she wants to block, but she's surprisingly good at blocking sometimes, depending on the shape of her hand, and you don't really know what it is. And she also has a pretty good fridge to supplement that. So between it all, I just think Aurora's like pretty resilient. I think she's going to be a popular deck at Worlds, and yeah, not surprised to see her here. And I expect next week probably still see her near the top.
That makes sense. I guess the next deck to talk about would be Enigma. She plays quite differently from all the other heroes. I guess her being one of the only 2 illusionists in the format now, she plays quite differently from the other heroes in the game. And what do you think of Enigma right now in this meta?
Yeah, I think Enigma's really strong. I think she's kind of like one of the defining decks of the metagame where every deck needs to answer the question, how do you beat Enigma? She has really good math on some of her attacks, just like the illusionist attacks, like Miraging Metamorph. You go like Tunic, Miraging Metamorph for 7, and you're like, yep, 1 card 7 sure is pretty good. Or she can like block out and swing her ward at you and just do like a 0 card like 4 with her Waxing Spectre or whatever. And that's like all really powerful. And yeah, so she kind of just gets to play like good math, and then if you stumble against her board, she like a couple times per game, she's like, I'm gonna build this board, and if you can't break it, you lose, and that's pretty good. So I don't know. I think that like some of the aggro decks she can struggle a little bit into, but I think that she's like surprisingly robust because she kind of has this both like good numbers in combination with the board state, and that combination is like hard to beat because she kind of like functions on multiple axes. Like you need to keep pressuring her, but she can also just like play a straight up value game with you and keep up.
She feels like a deck where she has a couple of like 80-20 matchups, and then like her bad matchup feels like she's maybe like a 45-55 or like a 40-60 dog instead of it being like the 20-80, like, you know, the mirror side of the of her good matchups. She seems to have some really, really strong matchups, and then her bad matchups seem to be like, man, she's like 40% to win, which is quite good for her having such polarized matchups.
Yeah, it feels like there's like, if you're playing a tournament, you probably get a few free wins for being Enigma, which is just like really, really strong to have in a tournament, or close to free wins, either because of the matchup or just because of like the way the game unfolds. You can just sort of like lock people out. Like I've seen people like turn 0, mirror guy with 2 counters after you spend your action point. My turn. Oh, look, I can transcend mirror guy with 4 counters. And it's just like, yeah, the game's like already over, right? Like it's just like already done. And even though you're technically unfavored into the aggro decks, sometimes you just go like mirror guy, command and conquer, arsenal this sink below. Can you deal with it? And they're like, huh, I kind of drew a brick. And then they block, and then they mirror guy you again, and you're just like suddenly kind of too far behind. So even though she's like maybe not great into all the aggro decks, like you said, I think it's like 40-60s, 45-55. She still like can definitely just win games anyways.
Yeah, like I was playing in the locals yesterday, local armor yesterday, and in the finals I played against an Enigma, and I felt like I lost the game on like turn 2, and I'm playing new, which was not the greatest matchup for new, mostly because I'm not really teched to beat the Enigma. I don't have red picks in my deck right now because I built this deck a month ago before Enigma got better and Zen got demolished.
That's fair. She is nasty. I also lost to Enigma last night, so
Yeah, Enigma was gross. I guess do you want to just keep going down the list, or do you want to talk about Dash first?
yeah, let's just keep going down the list. So Florian, 14 wins. We've seen Florian move up, I think, every week. He just keeps doing better and better, which is interesting to me. I had somewhat written him off. The Enigma matchup seemed tough, and at least according to Talishar data, the Viserai matchup looks bad, and it sort of makes sense, right? Like Viserai can sit there and build up rune chance and doesn't need to like decompose first, and he's just, he like has some incantations and he plays a Mordred Tide and you kind of just explode. So I could see that being hard for Florian. You don't really have basically like when Florian just gets to play like a back and forth game with like an aggressive deck, very, very solid hero. He just has like really good math. He has some disruption, just very, very good. But as soon as he has to be like more assertive, like into a Viserai that can set up or into an Enigma, he struggles a little bit. I think people are trying to play channels and trying to find ways to shore up those matchups. And I don't know. A big question I have for Worlds is, will people have figured out how to shore up those matchups, and how much will Florian show up? It seems like Japan is very high on Florian in general from what I hear. So I'm curious if they have some like different builds of Florian, maybe with I've even heard of people running like both channels, which is interesting, or channel mount or Millennium Tree, like one of them. So definitely some stuff to explore in Florian, and I'm curious to see what shows up, but I do think he has a few weaknesses as well. So like most of the heroes in this format, some good matchups and some bad matchups.
I think Florian seems to be like the type of deck where he is like a mid-range deck, like a classical mid-range deck, which means that the more tuned his decks become and to target a specific meta, the better his win rate's going to be, right? So I feel like he's having this success because the meta is kind of getting shored up and people are figuring out, at least at their locals, what people are bringing. And if Florian gets to see that and then adjust to that properly, his win rate's just going to naturally go up, right? Because like all mid-range decks, like New had this issue when she first came out. She just kind of wasn't performing well, and then after a month she just started adjusting to the meta perfectly, and then all the bad cards just left her deck and was left with only the cards that were attacking the specific meta. And I feel like Florian's gonna do kind of a similar thing, right? Where depending on the meta, he can kind of target Enigma if he wants to. Like he could play like a lot of Forming Gloomveil type cards and be like a traditional aggro Runeblade pile to attack, to tackle Enigmas, or go the other way and be like more of a control deck to tackle the aggro decks. Florian seems super flexible in this format.
Yeah, he does. My big question is if he can do it all at once. When I started building Florian, I tried him as a Channel Mount Heroic deck, and I found I was struggling into aggro, so that's why I shifted to the very like super fair, control-y, defensive style deck that is on the Patreon that I played week 1. The problem is, especially as Enigmas started to adapt and learn the matchup, you started to have trouble into Enigma. And I think you can maybe lean more into the channels to make your Enigma matchup better. I don't know if you're favored, but it's better. And then the question is, can you do that without giving too much up into the aggro decks? Because you don't want to be... I think that the problem that mid-range sometimes has, and especially in this format, is that it can be hard to kind of like deal with both Enigma as well as all the aggro decks, and all the aggro decks kind of ask slightly different things of you. So you're kind of pulled in a lot of directions, and whether somebody can find something that works into all of it, or just focus on a certain part, and that's the part that shows up in the part they play against. I could see that also working for Florian, but it does feel like there's some stuff to figure out there.
Fair enough. Okay, then next deck. This is the most interesting hero for me. It's gonna be Viserai. At least in our like West Side Canada NA, there hasn't been that many Viserais in our local PQs, but I know that it's been doing well on Talishar. Do you have any insight on Viserai?
Viserai is really, really strong. I think that Rune Rager Swarm and Runeblood Incantation are both just very, very good cards in that deck because they have natural go again, they make rune chants or benefit from making rune chants, and the synergy between that and Mordred Tide is just like super good. Like you can kind of just play Mordred Tide, have some incantations on board, and just kind of pop off and do 30 damage pretty easily. Deadwood Dirge has also been impressive as like a replacement for Read the Runes that has go again. You do have to sacrifice the aura to play it, but go again is pretty nice compensation. And a lot of the Viscerai decks we're seeing play like almost pitchless at least some turns. Like they still have blues, but they're getting to play like Amplify the Arknights, Drawn to Darkness, I think it's called. The 2 for 3 that draws a card. They're getting to play Rune Flash, Rune Rager Swarm, which are literal zeros. Rune Flash is a cost reducer. So between the cost reducers and the actual zeros, they can play these like almost pitchless turns. Yeah, he's a really strong aggro deck. He is probably Enigma's worst matchup. He can just kind of like set up board state and then push way over the top. And if you don't have a board, he can just kind of set up more, and then you build a board, and then he hits you for like 25, and Enigma really doesn't like that. So I think Viscerai might be Enigma's worst matchup, which is like very good for him. My big question about Viscerai is how he fares into some of the aggro decks. Dash.io has a Dissolution Sphere to potentially hate him out, basically turning off his Rune Chants for 2 whole turns. And then Zen with Zen State, of course, is also pretty good into Viscerai. And Zen's not the most represented here. He only had 4 wins this week, but we'll talk about him a little bit more with the Worlds predictions. I do think that Zen is a deck to keep an eye out for Worlds, and I know a number of other people a number of other people have been talking about Zen as well. So curious to see if he shows up.
Next one will be New. News with 11 wins as well. What do you think about New? I don't know how other people are winning with New right now, but I kind of am struggling with New. And I don't know what to do, honestly. There's just too many decks in the format.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the challenge, right? And that's sort of like what we talked about with Florian, where as the metagame narrows, we see New doing better. And New has a similar arc where she started low. She's been winning more and more as the metagame's more solidified. So I think that is helping her. But I do think that she's pulled in quite a few directions, and there's a lot to account for. I think that my take on New right now is that she is a good deck, but she is nowhere near as well positioned as she was for Amsterdam. And while you are like kind of good into a lot of the aggro decks in theory, most of them are pretty resilient. Like Viscerai can run pretty low on blues. I've seen some lists very, very low on blues. I think there was one on Fab TCG with like 6 blues in it, and then you just like can't Sirens Call him. Aurora, very low on blues as well, has like Somersault as a defensive asset, can sometimes arsenal these instants and get around arsenal disruptions. So yeah, I think New is like fine, but you kind of have to work really hard in all of your matchups right now. And I think that if you're like a very, very good New player, I would suspect that you can do well. But I think that it's not like it's not a deck that I would just like pick up and play right now because it's like, oh, like look how good New is. She's the answer to the meta game. I'm going to pick her. I think it's more like you need to be a bit of an expert with New, and then you can find success in this format is sort of what I think. And even then, I think she's like a solid choice, but not like clearly the best choice or anything like that.
Yeah, you have to really figure out the World's meta and then craft your deck to be able to beat all the decks you think are going to show up.
Yeah, and then you play a bunch of like 45 55s or 55 45s on each side, and then you have the Enigma matchup, which I do think is better now that you can tech for it. But I will say that New was on my list, and then I played 3 or 4 games into Enigma, and I was like, I don't want to deal with this. I'm off New. Forget it. Like, I haven't been playing New since Amsterdam, really. So I was like, maybe I'll pick it up. Maybe it'll click. Maybe I'll just play it. That's kind of what happened with Icelander last Worlds, is I wasn't going to play Icelander. Then I'm like, what if I play Icelander? And I tried it out, and it just was like, oh, this hero is so comfy. I've played it before. The matchups actually feel really good. I think this is the deck I'm taking. But I picked up New, and I'm like, there's so many problems. I don't have time to figure out problems. Okay, goodbye, New.
That's fair. Yeah, it's like how many picks you want to play in your deck kind of determine if you can beat Enigma or not. So then let's go down the list and talk about Dash.io. I guess this will be the most interesting deck to talk about. This is the first week of ProQuests that Dash.io got the Armory deck, which had Cerebellum Processor in it. How good is Dash.io?
That is kind of like, I think one of the biggest questions that we have going into Worlds is how good is Dash.io? And I think it's a bit of an open question. I don't have the answer. I'm curious to see what comes out of Osaka. I think that on one hand, Cerebellum Processor is a crazy card and gives her an incredibly high ceiling. In some ways, she almost feels a little bit out of place. Like her biggest turns are almost like Zen's biggest turns. Like she can do like 35, 40 damage sometimes with the right setup. That being said, it does need to be a particular setup. She is kind of vulnerable to disruption sometimes, and Warmonger's diplomacy really hoses her Cerebellum turns because you can't activate. Basically, like if you choose peace, you can draw cards, but then you can't attack. And if you choose war, then you can't activate your Cerebellums, and your Cerebellums are only on board for a little bit. So like often they kind of like Warmongers, and you're like, oh, by the time this Warmongers is gone, my Cerebellums are also gone. So it's interesting. I think that she's definitely a strong deck. We see that with her picking up 10 wins on basically like release weekend. Dash.io has been around for a while. It's not exactly a brand new hero, but new cards, new stuff to figure out. And she already picked up 10 wins. There may have also been some like card access problems, like maybe people didn't quite have the cards ready for the tournament. Maybe people didn't quite have the reps or the optimal builds. I think people almost certainly didn't have the optimal builds. So I do think that Dash.io is undeniably a strong hero. And for me, the question is Dash.io just like one of many strong heroes, which is sort of how the metagame, if we take Dash.io out of the equation right now, I feel like there's a bunch of like pretty strong decks with no like super clear best choice. Is she just like part of that mix? Or is she a cut above the rest because of how high her ceiling is? So it's a matter whether you can like solve those inconsistency problems where you draw all items. You can solve. She can still be fatigued, right? She can still be disrupted. She can still be a warmonger. So there are problems to solve, and I think that she's like pretty good if you just try to race her. But you know, decks can like board in a bunch of D reacts and trying to fatigue you, and can you deal with that? Or Nu can disrupt you, and can you deal with her disruption? Or all those types of things. So yeah, lots of questions about Dash.io, and that's been like something I've been trying to figure out in testing, and I'm not entirely certain of yet. I think she's at least good, but I don't know if she is like super, super good. And it kind of feels like it depends on what shows up, how well she'll do. If you have a bunch of like control-y decks that are built to fatigue her, it might be kind of rough. And if you have a lot of aggro decks running around that just want to race, that might be pretty good for her. So I could see it going either way. And I think it's like one of the most interesting questions that we have going into Osaka.
Yeah, that's fair. That's very fair. I feel like she also gets a little bit of edge in the at least week 0, like the first week of the Pro Quests that she's available because of the little bit of the surprise factor, right? Like if people aren't prepared for Dash.io, I don't think she can lose. Because she just has like these setup combo turns that are like kind of natural to play out.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I think that if people don't really have a plan for her and they just try to play like a straight up regular Flesh and Blood game with her, she will kind of blow you up. And then as people adapt to her, she has some more weaknesses. And then there's the question of how much can she adapt to those other heroes' adaptations. And I don't know how deep into that cycle we're going to get for Worlds is like kind of what it is. And I don't know where it ends. I think it's like everybody's kind of scrambling to try stuff out, figure stuff out. And a lot of people are a little bit hush-hush on Dash.io. I hear some people kind of low on her. I hear some whispers of her being very good. Honestly, I could see this deck being represented anywhere from like 10 to 25% in Worlds, and I would not be surprised, and I don't know which one it is.
Fair enough. It's kind of funny because in like the Vancouver meta, I think people were too high on Dash.io, so it feels like people have like a lot of tech cards to beat Dash.io, and then now we don't have enough cards to beat Enigma, so then Enigma's winning.
Yeah, and that is kind of the push and pull on the format, right? You have a bunch of really aggressive decks. You have Enigma, and then you have like Florian, who's kind of the king of mid range. And yeah, how do you deal with it all? And right now, it's kind of hard. There's just like a lot of different questions that are being asked of basically every deck.
Then let's talk about the last hero that we want to talk about from this meta game breakdown, which is Azalea, Ace in the Hole.
Yeah, kind of a classic hero. She's been doing well for a while. I think Azalea is like powerful on paper, right? You have Dominated Red in the Ledger, which is theoretically really good against aggro. You have Murkmire Grapnel for Enigma. So in theory, she's like very, very solid. I think that in practice, I've been kind of so-so on her. We have been seeing her tick up in win rate, and she's definitely been doing okay. And I think that she is an okay choice. But it's sort of like, I feel like the way Enigma decks are being adapted is like you're solid into her, but not great. Aurora, you're like kind of conceptually good into her, but then sometimes she just has instants to empty your hand. Like you read in the ledger her and she has like lightning press, and you're like, like that didn't really do what I wanted it to do. So yeah, it's a little tricky. And then a lot of decks are packing Warmongers. Like Aurora is just like an aggro deck that is a Runeblade but can play Warmongers in her deck, and we've seen some lists doing that. And that's pretty good into Azalea, and a bunch of like Florians, Enigmas, even some news are packing Warmongers for Dash.io, and then that also hurts Azalea. So I'm not sure if I love Azalea's position, but I do think that she's still like fairly powerful.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think Azalea is just like is getting hated out from Warmongers, and it just feels like when we talk about all of the top heroes right now, all of these top heroes you kind of want to play Warmongers against, except for maybe Enigma.
Yeah, it's like Viserai, Dash.io, and Azalea. Warmongers is all good against, and then Aurora, Enigma, Florian, and debatably New can all play Warmongers. New can play Warmongers. It doesn't really hurt her. It's just like she doesn't really have the go again, and it doesn't really fit into her game plan that well. Like Warmongers is like a lot better. Like if you're like an Aurora and you get to hit them for like 12 and play a Warmongers, that's a lot better than if you're just like, I don't know, Dagger, Warmongers, go.
The dagger into Warmongers is classical New.
Yeah. You do have a little bit of go again in that deck, but yeah, usually if you can end on a Warmongers, it's a lot more scary than if you just like drop it down. And yeah, so I don't know. It's interesting. I'm not sure. I'm not deep enough on New to know if Warmongers is right or not, but I have definitely had news play Warmongers against me, so I know that some people are playing it.
I think it is actually good and New. My take would be instead of going dagger into Warmongers, it's probably like block 9 play Warmongers is actually like the line to do.
No, I totally agree. I mostly was just trying to illustrate the struggles of going wide into Warmongers and New.
Yeah, but this what you described is not uncommon to see people go do something like do 1, end on this card, and be like, this was a good turn. Because yeah, I've definitely done that. The classic news like 1-1 pass.
Yeah, sometimes you just rip their hand apart and then you go pitch 2D reacts, dagger, go, and you're like, oh, okay, I see.
Yeah, man, new problems.
Yeah, that can be so scary, and then sometimes it's just like, how is this a deck?
Yeah, it really does feel that way. I feel like New's more of a test if the opponent can figure out how to beat the New more than the other way around.
Yeah, I agree with that.
If your opponent's good at devaluing New's turns, man, New's turns are so bad.
Yeah, that's so true. Like Aurora, sometimes all her cards are just 4 go again, and you take a card from her, and then she's like, she like surgical, and you're like, they're all 4 go again. No matter what I take, she does a 3 card 12. No.
No, but at least if they are doing a 3 card 12, that means your hand typically blocks for 9, so it's pretty good.
That's true.
Yeah, you go block for 9, Codex, Leave No Witness. Oh, what a great turn for New.
That's true. Sometimes it works out. But sometimes you're very sad.
That is true. Okay, so we talked about kind of the major players in this format so far. Is there any other heroes that you want to mention before moving on a little bit?
Yeah, I think that the last hero to mention is Zen. And a number of other content creators have talked about him. I've heard stories of big names being on Zen at ProQuest, but he only has like 4 wins, and I kind of expected his win percent to creep up. I've heard a lot of people saying this, and I kind of agree, but I haven't seen it come into fruition, and I wonder if we're going to see that at Worlds. The sales pitch on Zen is that you are still very, very good into Enigma, and you end up being kind of surprisingly good into some of the aggro decks because Zen State is really good against go wide aggro. The problem with Zen is your new matchup is atrocious. And I've never played the Florian matchup, but I would assume is also not great. So you have some like pretty big weaknesses, and then like you kind of like beat up Enigma and the aggro decks a little bit. Like it's not like they can't beat you, but like you're pretty solid into them, which is like maybe a nice place to be for Worlds if you like if you think like Aurora and Enigma are the best decks and you're like hypothetically pretty solid into both of them, that's like actually like a pretty good deck to bring. So I kind of wonder if we're going to see Zen have a little bit of a breakout performance. I feel like I hear a lot of people talking favorably about him, and then I wonder if people will actually show up with him. That's always the other side of it, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
But yeah, Zen surprised me. He's like, I think he's better than people think that he is. Like, he doesn't play Art of War now, so he maybe has room for like a couple of D reacts and can play like slightly more mid rangey. And then like sometimes he just like transcends, plays some combo card, does like chase aspect, and you're just like, oh yeah. I remember when Zen didn't Art of War me and still just did like a 4 card 20 out of nowhere, and that was pretty good. Or he like shoves Traverse and makes a Zen state, and you're like, that play is still pretty good. Or sometimes he hits Ancestral Harmony off the top, hitting a combo card, and you're like, oh, nothing has changed about this deck. So I don't know. I think Zen is like closer to Zen from before than people think that he is, but he's definitely not the same deck. He's not as powerful, but I think he's not as dead as some people would believe.
That makes sense. I guess the biggest change would be like his leg piece is less scary now, which is like before when he blocked with his leg piece, it was 90% of the time an Art of War getting converted into 2 cards. And now if he blocks with his leg piece, it's a Crouching Tiger. It's not 2 cards from the deck.
Yeah, and I've seen some people use the I think it's called is it called Pouncing Paws? It's the shoes from the the professor collaboration round the table thing, and it is like a battle worn one that you can break to make a tiger and banish. So it doesn't put the tiger in hand as the downside, but you can break up the block and the tiger, so you can use it to like cover an on hit when you need to, and then you can use the tiger to, I don't know, play a chase the tail when you need to, for example. So I've seen some people favoring that now that Art of War is gone, which is interesting. I have played a teeny bit of Zen, but I don't know. I don't have commentary on which one's better. I guess I haven't played enough to know.
So I guess this means that you're not gonna be on Zen for Worlds?
Yeah, I don't think I'm on Zen. I think Zen is a fine choice. I think there's a lot of fine choices. I actually think, honestly, any of the decks that we have talked about today so far are fine choices in this meta game, which is like kind of wild because I don't think most metas have been like that. And I'm curious if it will stay this way or if Worlds will show us something more narrow where some of these heroes will underperform, some of them will rise to the top, and the meta is just like still being solved. So I think that's kind of like the biggest question. And I think maybe the reason that it feels like this, if I had to guess, is because we just had like the biggest banning in the history of the game and a brand new set with 4 heroes. And if you look, 2 of those heroes are the top 3 winningest decks this week. And then Viserai is also a very winning deck that got a lot of support from this set. And then Dash.io is also a very winning deck that got the support from the Armory deck. So we just have like a whole bunch of new decks and a new ban list. And like everything is just kind of up in the air and people are figuring it out still. So I think that I suspect the metagame might narrow a little bit. And I'm curious to see if that will happen at Worlds or after Worlds. But yeah, it's curious because right now it does kind of feel like there's like a whole bunch of best decks, or not best decks, but like a whole bunch of like good decks that all have like 1 or 2 bad matchups to one of the other good decks. And I don't know if anything doesn't have a bad matchup. I think everybody has like kind of a bad matchup. Like maybe like News Spread is like very flat, but then she doesn't have like the really good matchups. And then Enigma has like polarized matchups, but her Viserai matchup's kind of bad. I think Aurora's matchup spread's like relatively flat as well. And then Dash.io is probably like pretty good into the aggro decks, not as good into the controlling decks unless you can figure something out. So I think there's going to be a lot of like what metagame shows up at Worlds, what pairings people get, and also if people are able to shore up some of these weaknesses, right? Because people have been putting in a ton of testing for Worlds, and if people are able to, if you're playing Dash IO and you can solve the fatigue and the disruption matchups, you probably just have the best deck in the format. Is it possible to do that? I don't know. That's kind of what everybody's figuring out. And I think that there's a bunch of decks that have these questions as well. Like I think with Enigma, if you can solve like Viscera and some of the aggro decks, Enigma might just be the best deck in the format too, right? So it kind of, it's very weird. I don't know if it's a matter of there's just like too many decks keeping each other in check, or people just need a little more time to figure out that tech. And we'll see in Osaka which of the two it is, I guess.
I'm in the boat that like I kind of like the one deck formats more than these like super wide formats. I think depending on how Worlds go, my next CC event's gonna be Calling Portland. If the meta is still like this, where it's a little bit too wide, I might just play Commoner instead of CC at this point.
Yeah, that's fair. It is a weird meta where we just like somehow don't have an obvious best deck, and that is like kind of unique and surprising. It is, I think, exciting from like a spectator point of view. I will say from a testing point of view, I think for some people it can be very relaxing. So I have like some teammates, for example, that are like, I just really want to play Aurora, or I just really want to play Enigma. And for the people that are like kind of locked, it's like kind of comforting in the sense that like there's no obvious best deck. So as long as the deck that you like is one of the good decks, you're kind of fine. And that's like kind of awesome. But on the other hand, I'm like, I want to take the best deck, but I don't know which one's the best deck. They all are kind of okay. and so that has been like a little stressful for me. I think overall I'm getting to a point where I'm kind of accepting it and I'm feeling pretty good about my prep. But yeah, it is a tough format to prep for, in my opinion. And maybe that depends how you like to prep for formats a little bit. But
yeah, that's fair. Then I guess a question here would be, do you know who you're going to bring for Worlds? Like, we talked about a bunch of the top decks. You said you want to bring the top deck, but do you know at least who you might play for Worlds at this point?
Yeah, I think I am somewhere between the two decks that I've won Pro Quests on. So Aurora and Dash IO, because I've spent some time on those decks, and I think that they are both solid. Or also Enigma, I think is a very good deck as well. And I've been trying to put in some reps with that deck, but honestly, there's just like so many heroes and so many matchups to test. I feel like a little spread thin, and so I'm probably just need to pick one and focus on it and just hope it's good enough.
I see. I guess the next question to talk about the CC meta is like, at least on Twitter or like in just general discourse of talking to people are talking about maybe ban Cerebellum or like maybe High Octane. What do you think about this?
I don't know. I think that on one hand, Dash IO does feel kind of out of place after the tome bans and almost feels like a deck playing Fab like before the book bans rather than after. Like, I think that she would feel right at home in like the Zen meta and feels a little bit weird here. But on the other hand, there does seem to be some counterplay, and I think it really comes down to like, as the decks get refined, how much counterplay is there, and the less counterplay there is, the more of a problem that it is, and the more that you can account for her, the less of a problem that it is. All of that being said, I also think that there are some people that have the viewpoint that even if some decks have counterplay to her, it could be that she's still not good for the game because she has some kind of a little bit unhealthy play patterns where a lot of the games kind of feel very out of your control. She can kind of just high roll you to oblivion. I think a lot of the aggro decks into her in particular don't tend to feel very, very good. And she's almost like a little bit of a Kano where like on her pop-off turn, she kind of like spends like 10 minutes, like, I don't know, just like on some of your pop-off turns, like you like draw 4 cards, tutor your deck twice, change the top card of your deck like 6 times, and like shoot your pistol like 8 times and have played like a total of like 10 cards, you know? And like, so like, it's just like not even to say that like Dash IO is like playing slowly or anything. It's just that you take a ton of game actions, and every time you take a game action, information changes a little bit because the top deck of your card changes, and you can potentially draw it, you can potentially play it off the top, you can potentially dig for something deeper, and because of that, she just kind of like has these weird, almost Kano like combo turns that you can block, aren't and is dealing physical damage, and you can interact with it, but it's, I've heard some people be like not a huge fan of that play experience, which I think does sort of matter as well. So I'm not really sure. I think I would like to see what happens at Worlds, but I might not be unhappy if they took one of these cards. Probably High Octane, I think, is like the more offensive of the two, but nah, we'll see. What do you think?
I think it's fine, but that's also because I don't like aggro decks that much. So I'm typically playing like new type decks where I can slot in like Erase Face. I think is a card that's been creeping up in people's like play rates. You attack them with an Erase Face after they put a Cerebellum, and they just have to block it out, and their turn is like significantly worse. Because Erase Face means that their boost doesn't work, and if their boost doesn't work, their High Octane kind of doesn't work, and their Cerebellum without the extra action point is like a lot worse. Or you pack in some Warmongers and you wait for them to play a Cerebellum, you Warmongers them, and their turn kind of turns off. And it wasn't like Zen, where we just didn't have cards that did the same thing. Whereas like the best thing you could do against Zen was maybe attack them with the weakest link. And sometimes they just don't block it, and when they don't block it, if you feel awful, and that's just not the same with Dash.io, right? You attack them with Erase Face, and they have to block it, right? There's no option for them. If they take it, their turn just kind of turns off.
Yeah, I think that I think you bring up a good point, and I share some of that as well, where there's like some better tools to disrupt, and it's also like more obvious when to disrupt. Like the Cerebellum's on board, you kind of know that Warmonger's going to be at least pretty decent, right? It depends like on all the cards in their hand, of course. Sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse. But Warmonger's probably pretty good if they have Cerebellums on board. And that's like a pretty safe bet. And, like Erase Face, like you said, kind of like always does the thing against her. And that's like such a contrast to Zen, where that's just like not the case, right? Like you don't know if Zen has the nuts or not, but because he could have the nuts, you kind of have to disrupt him and take him off of a big hand. But sometimes you try to disrupt him and he just blocks with the equipment, and then his turn's even bigger, and you kind of just helped him. And I think like that whole aspect of Zen was like made him a harder deck to compete with than Dash.io. But yeah, who knows? It's still early days, right? We got the Armory deck like a week ago, so who knows? We'll see where decks wind up at Worlds or in a month from now. That's sort of like the biggest question mark for me, is like where is the ceiling? How refined do these get?
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I guess let's move on and kind of wrap up the episode with the question: who do you think is going to be the most represented hero in this at Worlds?
My guess is Enigma. I think that usually in Flesh and Blood we have like one aggro deck, and it's like this is the best aggro deck. Sometimes there's like maybe two competing. Like in Leal, I think we had both Viserai as well as Briar competing for best aggro deck, and I think Briar shook out to be the best, but people were kind of not sure which of the two were the best. But usually there's kind of been like a clear best deck, right? Like Lexi, like Zen was the best aggro deck, and then Lexi before that was the best aggro deck, and before that is like probably Fi was the best aggro deck. And I think like most metas have been, or like we had like the chain meta, right? And like most metas have been defined by a clear best aggro deck, and this one kind of isn't, right? We talked about all the good decks in the format, and we're like Aurora is pretty good, Viscera is pretty good, Dash.io is pretty good, Zen's pretty good, Azalea is also pretty good, and like depending how you want to define an aggro deck, kind of an aggressive deck, maybe in a little bit of a different way, but it's still playing a proactive game plan that deals damage. And because of that, I think that the aggro heroes are going to be like, I think aggro will be the biggest meta share, but I think it's going to be split up across all the aggro decks. And then I think Enigma is going to be the most represented individual hero, just because, well, for one, she's illusionist. For two, she's been winning a lot, and for three, I think that she kind of represents like a different play style. Like for people that don't want to bring aggro, it's like, well, you play Enigma, Florian, or New, or you're like on some rogue deck. And because of that, I kind of think that there's like a little bit less competition for those control decks, and a little compared to the aggro decks, if that makes sense.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. You think it's so essentially you think it's gonna be an aggro meta, but then there's gonna be like 4 different aggro decks. So then Enigma's gonna be the most represented.
Yeah, like I could see something like it wouldn't surprise me if it's like 25% Enigma, 20%, I don't know, Aurora, and then like 10 to 15% of like Viscerai, Dio kind of thing. And I don't know where Zen will end up. Maybe there'll be a lot of Zen, maybe there won't. And I could be off on like some of this. I could see some being like slightly more, slightly less, but I kind of think Enigma will be the biggest individual chunk, even though aggro will overall be the largest portion in terms of like archetype.
Yeah, okay. That's a very reasonable take. Okay, yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Oh, is there a living legend battle hardened in Osaka?
There is. On the Sunday, it's Living Legend Battle Hardened. I traditionally do not play these Battle Hardens because they're usually a different format from Worlds, and so I have usually done zero prep. I still have done zero prep for this, but I am kind of considering bringing a deck. We'll see. We'll see. If I get around to building and packing something, I will do that, but I'm going to make sure I get everything else taken care of first. If I do take a deck, the deck will be Lexi. And in particular, I think that Lexi with like all the new lightning cards is potentially pretty sweet. Like you get access to like Lightning Greaves. You can play like Gone in a Flash. I don't know. There's a whole bunch of new lightning cards, and Lightning Lexi was always a cool deck. Is the deck good? I don't know. I haven't played it, but it seems cool. So if I was gonna play that format, I would probably just build some Lexi deck and hope it's good. And if it's not good, then oop.
Okay. Makes sense. Makes sense. That's super fair. Yeah, I guess that's everything I wanted to talk about today. Do you have anything else to add before we wrap up the episode?
No, I don't think so. I think that's pretty much it. I'm pretty excited for Worlds. I think it's going to be a very cool event. Excited to visit Japan as well. Had a great time last time I was there, and expect to have a great time again now. So yeah, looking forward to seeing everyone at Worlds. If you are at Worlds, feel free to come up, say hi. Would love to chat. And if you're not, I hope that you enjoy watching it from home. You should definitely check out the stream. I think it'll be, lots of cool stuff going on. But yeah, that's going to wrap us up. If you want to get in touch with us, you can do that on Twitter. I'm at Yukili Bender. Jay is at Ueda J. And we have an email on the bobble at gmail.com. If you want to check us out on Patreon, you can do that as well. Patreon.com/on the bobble. Thank you again to all of our patrons. I think we missed that Patreon shout out. So my mistake there, but we really do appreciate you. You do so much for the show and you make everything that we do possible. So thank you to all of our patrons and thank you to all of our listeners. I hope that you all have a good rest of your day and good luck at your upcoming events.
After this Worlds and after this Peaky season, we don't really have any more Rosetta events after this, do we?
Like draft?
Yeah, like Rosetta draft tournaments that we can play for like kind of high stakes. And because of that, I'm gonna make the 3-hour drive down to Seattle from Vancouver to play the last draft PQ. I'm already qualified and I don't need to win or I don't really need to go, but this is gonna be my last chance to play because I can't go to Worlds.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I think there are no more Rosetta limited events, at least that I know of, that I'm planning to go to. So yeah, it's kind of wild. Like it feels like we just finished up our how to play episodes, and honestly, the format's really sweet. I kind of feel like I'm still learning stuff and would like to get a few more drafts in before Worlds. Feel pretty good about my prep, but with like a few more reps. But yeah, I guess you're right. It's been like a month and the format is kind of sunsetting. Crazy.
Yeah, I'm kind of sad. Like, when is the next set after this coming out? It's got to be for a while, right?
Well, we have world premiere January 17th, something like that, for the next set. So,
but then that means the pro quest that I'm going to is tomorrow in October 26th, and we have 2.5 months of nothing.
yeah. I mean, often over the holidays, it's like a little bit quiet. There are some callings, But yeah, I guess in terms of limited, then maybe there's not that much. I wonder. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's like a battle hardened somewhere.
Well, not there isn't a battle hardened that's accessible to me. That's gonna be that's gonna be in this format.
Oh, there's battle hardened Stockholm in Sweden on November 22nd. I think that's maybe the same weekend as calling Portland. You
No,
could go to
no,
that trip.
no. That's Rosetta Draft Super Armory.
Oh, Super Armory. It's not even the battle hardened. The battle hardened CC. You're right.
Yeah, it's Battle Hardened CC. I actually don't think there's any more Rosetta like premier events essentially.
That is kind of a shame. How have you ended up feeling about Rosetta? I remember you were like sort of like it's pretty good, but I'm reserving judgment on it last time we talked. How are you feeling about the format now with a bit more reps under your belt?
I think there is a clear best deck, and I think it's feeling a little bit like Monarch for me, where in Monarch it was like Prism was the best deck, and I kind of didn't have a reason to draft anyone else. And I feel like in this format, Florian is taking that same spot, and I'm willing to fight like 3 other people to play a Florian deck, and that's not really like a good spot. And obviously the other hero are good, but like in Monarch, like Leviathan was sometimes good if you got like 4 to 5 of her premium cards, and Bolton was good if you got the rare, and that's how the Lightning decks feel to me right now. Whereas like if I get like a red somersault times 2, then I'm like kind of in. And if I don't, I'm like not really interested in Lightning. And then Verdance is like my backup plan um if Florian kind of fails. And a lot of the times because like the red zaps get taken up kind of early, I never find myself in Verdance. So it feels like I just draft Florian a bunch, and it feels a little bit stale is what it feels like to me right now. But the gameplay is great. So that's what it has over Monarch is what I have to say.
That's fair. Yeah, I do think the gameplay is very good, but I do agree. Florian seems a little too good.
Yeah, Florian's a little bit too good. I think the biggest issue in this format is Cadaverous Tilling is too good, and the Earth headpiece is too good. Is my take. Is like they should have just had that Earth headpiece block for 0, and then gets +2 if you have like 4 Earth cards or something like that.
Yeah, I think Rotwood Reaper also kind of too good.
Yeah, Rotwood Reaper could have like attacked for 2 and gave +1.
Yeah.
Yeah, instead of +2. I think plus 2 is too good on that card. It's too free.
Yeah, I think I agree with that.
But Florian just feels like he was tuned for CC and not tuned for limited. And I don't think you can tune Florian in a way where it's good in both CC and limited. Is what it feels like, where his hero ability is too good in limited at 4, but it's too bad at 8. But in CC, it's too good at 4 and like too bad at 8. And maybe it was like some kind of a symmetry thing with Verdance, where I think they could have made Florian at 6, and he would have been pretty fair and limited, and maybe too strong and constructed. I'm not even sure if that's the case there, but I feel like Florian's ID could have been at 6, and he would have been fine.
Yeah, that's interesting. I could see that for sure. Need to play 3 Decompose.
Or you could play 2 Decompose, but it has to be 6 Earth cards.
That's true. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I don't mind that.
Yeah, but then Verdance would be way too bad at 6.
I wonder if they could ever do the 2 heroes different. That might be kind of weird, though.
I feel like it's more of like a... I understand as like if they're a game designer and they want the game to be a little bit more simple, it's like easier to say that Earth Heroes have to like be 4 and 8 all the time instead of like, oh, Verdance is 4 and 8, but then Florian's 6. Seems really weird, but yeah, it's I'm just like strictly on a I want limited to be good standpoint. Probably should have been at 6.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say. Goodbye, Rosetta. Oh,
I miss this set.
we need one more month of this set.
I agree.